People who don't have friends are often misunderstood in ways that reveal more about society than they do about the person themselves. The moment people notice someone spending a lot of time alone, they are quick to create a story. They assume that person must be lonely, rejected, socially awkward, difficult to approach, or somehow unable to connect with others. But what if the reality is completely different? What if some people are alone not because they cannot find people, but because they have discovered that solitude can be more valuable than the wrong kind of company? This is one of the most misunderstood personality traits of people who don't have many friends. They often value solitude more than social approval. They are not necessarily avoiding people because they dislike humanity. They are not always isolated because nobody wants them around. In many cases, they have consciously chosen to spend more time alone because they refuse to sacrifice their peace, their principles, or their identity simply to fit into a crowd. And that distinction is extremely important. There is a major difference between being unable to connect with people and being unwilling to connect with the wrong people. From the outside, both situations can look identical. You see someone eating alone, working alone, traveling alone, or spending most evenings by themselves, and you may immediately assume something is wrong. Some people are desperately searching for company because silence makes them uncomfortable. Others discover that silence gives them something they cannot find in a crowded room: clarity. Most people naturally seek acceptance. Human beings are social creatures, and the desire to belong is completely normal. People want to be appreciated. They want invitations. They want messages waiting on their phones. They want people who remember their birthdays, ask how they are doing, and include them in plans. There is nothing inherently wrong with any of that. The problem begins when the desire to belong becomes stronger than the desire to remain authentic. When someone becomes so afraid of being alone that they are willing to tolerate disrespect, dishonesty, manipulation, constant drama, or relationships that slowly destroy their confidence, being surrounded by people stops being a sign of success. It becomes a form of dependence. People who value solitude often see this differently. Instead of constantly asking, "How can I make people like me?" they begin asking a much deeper question. Is this relationship actually adding value to my life? That small change in perspective can completely transform the way a person chooses relationships. They stop measuring friendship by quantity and begin measuring it by quality. They stop caring about how many people know them and start caring about whether the people who know them actually understand them. They stop chasing invitations simply because they are afraid of missing out, and they become comfortable staying home when a social environment does not align with their values. This is where solitude becomes powerful. Solitude gives a person the opportunity to hear their own thoughts without constantly being interrupted by the opinions of others. Think about how difficult it is to truly understand yourself when you are constantly surrounded by other people's expectations. Your coworkers have ideas about how you should behave. Social media constantly shows you what everyone else appears to be achieving, and without realizing it, you can begin constructing your identity from other people's opinions. You may start wearing certain things because they are popular. You may pursue a career because it sounds impressive. You may pretend to enjoy things because your social group enjoys them. You may even change your personality depending on who is standing in front of you. Eventually, you can become surrounded by people while becoming increasingly disconnected from yourself. You begin asking questions that are difficult to ask when you are constantly distracted. What do I actually want? What kind of person am I becoming? Which parts of my personality are genuine? Which decisions have I made because I wanted them, and which ones have I made because I wanted approval? What kind of people actually deserve access to my life? These questions may be uncomfortable, but they are valuable. Solitude becomes a classroom, silence becomes a teacher, and self-reflection becomes a form of personal development. A person who cannot tolerate being alone may constantly escape into entertainment, conversation. But someone who becomes comfortable with solitude learns something different. They learn that silence is not necessarily emptiness. Sometimes silence is where understanding begins. They may spend time reading, studying human behavior, reflecting on their decisions, developing skills, planning their future, or simply thinking deeply about their experiences. Over time, this creates a level of self-knowledge that many people never develop. And self-knowledge is powerful because you cannot build a strong life if you do not understand the person building it. This is also why people who value solitude are often less willing to follow the crowd. When everyone is rushing toward the same opportunity, they ask whether it actually makes sense. When everyone is repeating the same opinion, they may question whether the opinion is genuinely theirs. This independent thinking can make them appear unusual. Sometimes it can even make them unpopular. But popularity is not always evidence of truth. A person can be accepted by everyone and still be completely disconnected from their own principles. Another person can be misunderstood by almost everyone and still know exactly who they are. Why create tension? Why risk rejection? Why make yourself uncomfortable? But a person who has learned to value solitude is often less afraid of standing apart. They have already discovered that being alone is survivable. That realization creates freedom. If you are terrified of being rejected, other people have enormous power over you. They can pressure you, they can manipulate you, they can make you compromise, they can threaten to leave, and you may do almost anything to keep them. But when you become comfortable with your own company, the fear of losing people becomes weaker. You begin understanding that losing a relationship is painful, but losing yourself to preserve that relationship can be far more damaging. This is one of the hidden strengths of solitude. It teaches you that your peace has value, and once you understand that, you become more selective about what you allow into your life. This does not mean becoming arrogant. It does not mean believing that everyone else is beneath you. And it certainly does not mean assuming that every person who spends time alone is secretly wiser or stronger than everyone around them. That would be another misunderstanding. Some people are isolated because they are struggling socially. Some genuinely experience loneliness. But there is another group of people who have few friends because they have consciously rejected shallow relationships. Those people are different. Their solitude is not necessarily a symptom of failure. Sometimes it is a consequence of standards. They understand the difference between being surrounded and being understood. A person can have hundreds of contacts and still have nobody they can call when life becomes difficult. They can attend parties every weekend and still feel emotionally disconnected. They can receive dozens of messages every day and still feel completely unknown. This is why someone with very few friends may actually have a deeper relationship with the people they do allow into their life. They are not interested in collecting acquaintances. They are interested in finding people with whom they can be completely genuine. And genuine connection requires something that social popularity often does not: vulnerability. You cannot build deep relationships by constantly performing. You have to be willing to reveal who you really are. But people who have experienced betrayal or disappointment may become very careful about who receives that access. They learn that not everyone who smiles at them is necessarily loyal to them. This is where solitude and trust begin to overlap. The more comfortable a person becomes alone, the less desperate they become to immediately trust someone simply because that person offers companionship. They can wait, they can observe, they can let time reveal character, and that patience protects them. There is also a psychological benefit to not depending heavily on social approval. If people compliment them, they feel valuable. If people ignore them, they feel rejected. If their emotional state becomes controlled by external events. But someone who has developed inner stability begins measuring themselves differently. They ask whether they are becoming better, whether they are keeping their promises to themselves, whether they are learning, whether they are acting according to their principles, whether they are making progress. That creates a different type of confidence. It is quieter. It does not require an audience. It does not need constant applause. And because it is built internally, it is much harder for another person to take away. This is why solitude can become one of the greatest teachers in life. It teaches a person that they can survive without constant attention. They can enjoy a day without receiving a message. They can make decisions without asking everyone for permission. They can work toward a goal without announcing it. They can experience success without needing everyone to notice. And perhaps most importantly, they can experience failure without believing that failure defines their worth. When someone becomes comfortable alone, they begin investing their time differently. Instead of spending hours trying to maintain relationships that have become exhausting, they may use that time to improve themselves. The important thing is not exactly what they do. The important thing is that their time is no longer controlled entirely by the need for social validation. They begin treating time as an investment. Every hour spent improving themselves becomes something that may produce value later. And this is one reason why long periods of solitude have appeared in the lives of many thinkers, creators, leaders, and innovators. Before the world saw the result, there was often a period when the person had to work without applause. They had to develop ideas without knowing whether anyone would understand them. They had to practice without an audience. They had to fail privately before succeeding publicly. Solitude creates space for that process. But there is an important reality that should never be ignored. People who value solitude can still become lonely. They are still human. They can still want someone to talk to. They can still wish they had a person with whom they could celebrate a victory or share a difficult day. Choosing solitude does not make someone immune to emotional needs. The difference is that they may recognize that temporary loneliness is sometimes healthier than permanent exposure to unhealthy relationships. Being alone for a period of time can hurt, but surrounding yourself with people who constantly drain you can slowly change who you become. If every friendship is based on competition, you may begin measuring your worth against everyone else. If every relationship involves manipulation, you may stop trusting your own judgment. If every social environment demands that you pretend, you may eventually forget what authenticity feels like. So sometimes walking away is not rejection, it is protection. A person may choose an empty room over a crowded room because the empty room allows them to remain themselves. That choice can look strange from the outside, but not every decision needs to make sense to everyone else. One of the strongest signs of someone who values solitude is consistency. The person they are when nobody is watching is usually close to the person they present publicly. They do not need to constantly reinvent themselves for different groups. They are not one person around friends and another around strangers. They may adapt socially, but they do not abandon their core identity simply to be accepted. That consistency creates quiet confidence. They know what they believe, they know what they value, they know what they will tolerate, and they know what they will walk away from. But these numbers tell us very little about the quality of someone's life. A person can have a huge social circle and still be deeply unhappy. Another person can have only 1 or 2 meaningful relationships and feel completely fulfilled. The goal should not be to have the largest possible circle. The goal should be to build relationships that are honest, respectful, and meaningful. And if those relationships are not available at a particular stage of life, learning to stand alone can be far healthier than desperately filling the empty space with people who do not belong there. This is the deeper lesson behind solitude. It is about becoming connected to yourself strongly enough that you no longer need to betray yourself for acceptance. The person who fears solitude may accept almost anything to avoid it. The person who understands solitude can say no. No to disrespect, no to manipulation, no to fake friendship, no to constant drama, no to pretending, no to becoming someone else just to fit into a group. And sometimes, saying no leaves you alone, but being alone is not always the worst outcome. Sometimes being alone is the price of protecting the person you are becoming. They can walk into an empty room without immediately reaching for their phone. They can spend a weekend alone without believing that their life has failed. They can pursue a goal without needing constant encouragement. They can disagree with the crowd without collapsing under the pressure of rejection. They can lose people without losing themselves. That is a powerful form of freedom. And once you understand it, you begin seeing people with few friends differently. Maybe they are not necessarily lonely. Maybe they are not rejected. Maybe they are not socially incapable. Maybe they are not necessarily lonely. Maybe they are not rejected. Maybe they are not socially incapable. Maybe they are not rejected. They have learned that the wrong company can be more exhausting than solitude. They have learned that acceptance is meaningless if it requires self-betrayal. They have learned that silence can reveal things that constant conversation hides. And they have learned that before finding the right people, you sometimes need to become comfortable being alone. Because when you no longer fear solitude, you stop choosing relationships from desperation. You choose them from clarity. You stop asking who will accept me, and you start asking who deserves a place in my life. That is a completely different mindset, and it changes everything. The truth is, but choosing to be alone is very different from being unable to connect with others. For some people, solitude is not a punishment. It is a conscious decision that protects their focus, strengthens their character, and gives them room to grow without constantly seeking approval. Their greatest personality trait is not simply that they enjoy being alone. It is that they value becoming the right person before desperately searching for the right people. And once someone reaches that point, they begin to understand something most people learn much later. You do not need to be accepted by everyone. You need to remain loyal to yourself. And that is when solitude stops being something you endure and becomes something you can use to build a stronger, more authentic life. But this is only the beginning. Because once a person learns to value solitude over social approval, another powerful personality trait often develops. They stop trusting people quickly. They begin watching actions instead of listening to promises. They become patient. They observe. And they understand that loyalty is not something someone can simply claim. It is something they must prove through consistent behavior over time. That is where the next part of the story begins. Once you understand why people who don't have friends often value solitude more than social approval, another personality trait begins to reveal itself. They trust people very slowly. At first, this can be difficult to understand. Someone meets a new person, has a pleasant conversation, and immediately begins treating that person as a friend. They share personal stories, reveal their problems, talk about their plans, and quickly become emotionally invested. But people who have very few friends often move differently. They watch, they listen, they observe, and they simply understand that trust should be earned through consistent behavior rather than given away because someone knows how to make a good first impression. This difference can make them appear distant. It can make them seem cold. It can even make other people believe that they are difficult to connect with. But what looks like distance may actually be careful judgment. They understand something that many people learn only after painful experiences. Appearances can be extremely convincing. Someone can promise that they will always be there and disappear the moment you genuinely need them. Someone can act kind when everything is going their way and reveal an entirely different personality when they are challenged. This is why people who trust slowly pay attention to something far more important than words. They pay attention to patterns. A single conversation does not tell them who someone is. A charming personality does not tell them who someone is. A promise does not tell them who someone is. Time does. Repeated behavior does. Pressure does. And difficult situations do. Robert Greene's observations about human nature often emphasize the gap between appearance and reality. People know how to appear confident, generous, intelligent, loyal, or harmless, but maintaining an image forever is much harder. Eventually, behavior reveals character. That is why someone who trusts slowly may not react strongly to the first impression you give them. They are not necessarily impressed by charm. They are interested in consistency. They want to know whether your actions match your words. If you say you respect people, how do you treat someone who cannot do anything for you? If you say you value honesty, what do you do when telling the truth could make you look bad? These situations reveal far more than a polished introduction ever could. People who have few friends often understand this because they have learned to watch human behavior instead of simply believing human claims. And for many of them, this lesson came from experience. They were not always cautious. There may have been a time when they trusted people easily. They believed promises. They gave second chances. They assumed that kindness meant loyalty. They assumed that if they treated someone well, that person would naturally treat them well in return. Then something happened. Maybe a friend betrayed them. Maybe they discovered that a relationship had been built almost entirely on convenience. Maybe someone they trusted revealed motives they had never expected. Experiences like these can completely change how a person approaches relationships. But there is an important difference between becoming bitter and becoming observant. Some people experience betrayal and decide that nobody can be trusted. Others experience betrayal and decide that trust must be earned more carefully. The second response is far more useful. Instead of hating people, they study behavior. Instead of assuming everyone is dangerous, they become selective. This is why their small social circle does not necessarily mean they dislike people. They may actually value relationships more deeply than the average person. Because they understand the cost of misplaced trust, they refuse to treat trust as something cheap. Think about trust for a moment. When you trust someone, you are not simply allowing them to know your name or spend time with you. You are giving them access to parts of your life that other people do not have. You may tell them your fears, your ambitions, your weaknesses, your family problems, your insecurities, your private experiences, your future plans. And once someone has that information, you cannot completely take it back. That is why cautious people are careful about who receives it. They understand that vulnerability can create connection, but vulnerability in the wrong relationship can create pain, so they do not reveal everything immediately. They allow a relationship to develop naturally. They watch how the other person handles small things before trusting them with bigger things. And this is one of the most intelligent ways to understand character. You do not need to interrogate someone. You simply need to observe them over time. Watch how they talk about people who are not present. Watch how they respond when they are corrected. Do they become defensive? Do they attack? Do they accept responsibility? Watch how they behave when they do not get what they want. Do they remain respectful, or does their kindness disappear? Watch how they treat people who have less power than them. That can reveal more about their character than the way they treat someone they desperately want to impress. These small details create a picture. One detail may mean nothing, but repeated patterns mean something. This is why people who trust slowly often become excellent observers of human nature. They are not necessarily sitting in a room analyzing every movement. It is much simpler than that. They have learned to pay attention. While other people are focused on whether someone is entertaining, attractive, confident, or interesting, they may quietly notice whether that person is reliable. They may notice whether the person keeps small promises. They may notice whether their stories constantly change. They may notice whether they take responsibility for mistakes. They may notice whether they only contact people when they need something. They may notice whether their personality changes dramatically depending on who is around. These things matter because character is rarely revealed in one dramatic moment. One of the biggest mistakes people make in relationships is becoming emotionally attached before they have enough information. Someone gives them attention, they feel special. Someone makes them laugh, they feel connected. Someone says exactly what they wanted to hear. They begin imagining a future. The emotional story becomes stronger than the available evidence. Then warning signs appear. But by that point, they are already attached. They do not want to believe the negative information because accepting it would mean accepting that the relationship they imagined may not be real. People who trust slowly, they can enjoy someone's company without immediately deciding that person belongs in their inner circle. They can appreciate kindness without assuming permanent loyalty. They can have a good conversation without creating an entire story about the future of the relationship. They let time do the work. This is an extremely valuable skill because time exposes contradictions. Someone can pretend for a day. They can pretend for a week. They can even pretend for months. But eventually, consistency becomes difficult to fake. Pressure changes people. Conflict changes people. Conflict changes people. Conflict, and those situations reveal dimensions of personality that ordinary conversations cannot. This is why people who trust slowly are often willing to wait before calling someone a true friend. They do not need immediate certainty. They are comfortable saying, "I don't know this person well enough yet." That sentence may sound simple, but it requires discipline. Many people feel pressure to quickly categorize others: friend, enemy, good person, bad person, trustworthy, untrustworthy, but cautious people understand that human beings are complicated. Someone can be kind in one situation and selfish in another. They are not necessarily looking for perfection. They are looking for patterns of character. There is another reason they trust slowly. They understand that loyalty is rare. A lot of relationships are built around convenience. People remain close while they benefit from one another. They share good times. They laugh together. They go out together. They support each other when everything is easy. But what happens when circumstances change? What happens when one person loses their job? What happens when supporting someone requires sacrifice? That is where relationships are tested. It is easy to stand beside someone during their best moment. Real loyalty becomes visible during difficult ones. This is why people with few friends may care deeply about reliability. They do not need someone who constantly tells them how loyal they are. They want someone who demonstrates it. A person who says, "I'll always be there for you," means very little if they disappear whenever things become inconvenient. A person who never makes dramatic promises but consistently shows up may be far more trustworthy. Actions are evidence, words are claims, and cautious people understand the difference. Some people misunderstand this behavior. They may say, "Trust cannot be forced." If someone genuinely deserves your trust, they should understand why it takes time. They should not become angry simply because you have boundaries. They should not pressure you to reveal everything. They should not make you feel guilty for moving carefully. In fact, a trustworthy person usually allows trust to develop naturally. They understand that genuine connection cannot be rushed. This is one reason why people who trust slowly often build deeper relationships when they finally decide someone is worthy of their confidence. Their friendships may be fewer, but they can be stronger. They may know their weaknesses, they may know their history, they may know their ambitions, and most importantly, they may have earned the right to know those things. This is the difference between acquaintances and genuine friendship. An acquaintance knows information about you. A genuine friend understands you. And people who have learned the cost of shallow relationships often prefer the second. Their goal is not to collect names. Their goal is to build trust. There is also something powerful about their ability to observe people without immediately judging them. They may notice someone who appears only when they need a favor. They may notice someone who constantly talks about loyalty but frequently breaks promises. These observations do not necessarily make them cynical. They simply make them informed, and being informed allows them to choose more carefully. This careful selection protects their peace. Imagine investing months or years into a friendship only to discover that the other person secretly resents you. Imagine trusting someone with private information and later discovering they have shared it with others. Imagine constantly forgiving the same betrayal because you were afraid of losing the relationship. Imagine someone who trusts slowly may avoid much of this pain by taking their time at the beginning. They understand that prevention is often easier than repair. This does not mean they never get hurt. No amount of observation makes someone completely immune to betrayal. People can surprise you. Circumstances can change. Even trustworthy people can make mistakes. The point is not to eliminate risk. The point is to avoid unnecessary risk. That distinction matters. Healthy caution says, I will give you a chance, but I will pay attention. Fear says, nobody deserves my trust. And people who have very few friends must be careful not to let their standards become walls that nobody can cross. Being selective is valuable. Being permanently closed is not. Human beings need connection. Even the most independent person can benefit from friendship, community, love, and companionship. The goal is not to avoid people. The goal is to choose people wisely. That is what makes slow trust so powerful. It gives a person time to discover whether a relationship is real before becoming deeply invested in it. And it allows them to understand whether the relationship is based on mutual respect or hidden convenience. There is another hidden advantage. People who trust slowly often become better at recognizing manipulation. Manipulation depends heavily on emotional urgency. Someone may try to make you feel guilty for saying no. They may rush intimacy. They may demand immediate trust. They may tell you that you are the only person who understands them. They may create intense emotional experiences. Very quickly, they may pressure you into proving your loyalty. They can separate emotion from evidence. That ability is extremely valuable. Because when emotions become intense, judgment often becomes weaker. The cautious person understands that strong emotion does not automatically equal strong connection. Sometimes intensity is simply intensity. Real trust is quieter. It develops through repeated experiences. You see someone keep their word. You see them respect your boundaries. You see them admit when they are wrong. You see them support you without demanding something in return. You see them protect your privacy. You see them remain consistent when circumstances change. They have enough evidence. This is why slow trust should not be confused with emotional coldness. In many cases, it is actually evidence that someone takes relationships seriously. They understand that friendship influences your mindset. The people around you influence what you believe. They influence what you tolerate. They influence your habits. They influence your ambitions. They influence how you see yourself. So choosing friends is not a small decision. It can shape the direction of your life. If you spend years surrounded by people who constantly complain, you may become comfortable with gossip. If you spend time with people who have no ambition, your own ambition may slowly weaken. But if you surround yourself with disciplined, honest, thoughtful people, their standards can raise your own. This is why people who trust slowly are often selective about their inner circle. They understand that access to their life is not meaningless. Every person you allow close to you leaves an influence. Sometimes that influence is obvious. Sometimes it is invisible, but it exists. And once you understand this, you begin to understand why someone may have very few friends without actually feeling that anything is missing. They may have walked away from people who repeatedly violated boundaries. They may have refused to participate in gossip. They may have stopped giving second chances to people who repeatedly betrayed them. From the outside, it looks like they have lost people. From their perspective, they may have protected themselves. And that is the deeper lesson. Trust is not about believing everyone. It is about learning who has earned belief. You do not have to assume someone is bad. You simply do not have to assume they are good enough to enter your inner circle before they have demonstrated it. Give people opportunities to reveal themselves. Let time speak. Watch consistency. Pay attention to how they treat people when they have nothing to gain. Notice how they respond when they are disappointed. Notice whether they respect boundaries. Notice whether they take responsibility. Notice whether they celebrate your success or secretly compete with it. Notice whether they remain present when life becomes difficult. These observations are far more valuable than impressive words, because eventually people reveal themselves, not always immediately, not always dramatically, but consistently. And those who understand this become patient. They stop chasing instant connection, and they start stop believing that having more friends automatically means having better relationships. One loyal friend can be more valuable than 50 acquaintances. One honest conversation can be more meaningful than hundreds of empty interactions. One person who consistently protects your confidence can be worth more than an entire social circle that only appears when life is easy. That is why people who don't have many friends may seem selective. They are not necessarily searching for perfect people. They are searching for real people, people whose actions match their words, people who understand reciprocity, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who respect boundaries, people who can admit mistakes, people who do not require constant performance, and people who understand that trust is something two people build together. The truth is that trusting slowly is not automatically a weakness. It can be a sign of emotional intelligence developed through experience. It shows that someone understands the value of their emotional investment. They know that relationships consume time, attention, energy, and trust, so they choose carefully where those resources go. In a world where people are often judged by appearances, they judge character through consistency. While others listen to promises, they watch behavior. While others chase instant connection, they allow relationships to develop naturally. While others fear losing people, they understand that losing the wrong person can sometimes be a form of protection. And while others measure friendship by numbers, they measure it by loyalty. This is why people who don't have friends often remain misunderstood. Their small circle may not represent a lack of social ability. It may represent a high threshold for trust. They are not necessarily saying, "I don't need anyone." They are saying, "Not everyone deserves access to me." That is a very different statement. And when you understand that difference, you begin seeing their behavior through a completely different lens. Their silence is not always rejection. Their distance is not always arrogance. Their caution is not always fear. Sometimes it is simply experience turned into wisdom. But slow trust is only one part of their personality. Because once someone learns to value solitude and becomes careful about who they trust, another powerful trait often develops. They also need to protect their self-respect, and that is where the next transformation begins. They become willing to walk away from relationships that demand too much of them while giving too little in return. They stop accepting disrespect simply because they are afraid of being alone. They stop tolerating dishonesty simply because they have known someone for years. And they begin to understand one of the hardest lessons in life. Having people around you is not valuable if keeping them requires you to lose yourself. That realization leads directly to the next personality trait, the ability to maintain strong personal standards, even when those standards leave you with fewer people in your life. Once you understand why people who don't have friends value solitude and trust others slowly, another defining personality trait becomes impossible to ignore. They have strong personal standards, and they refuse to settle for fake relationships simply because they are afraid of being alone. This is one of the biggest reasons they often have very few friends. It is not because they cannot connect with people. It is because they refuse to build connections that require them to sacrifice their self-respect, their values, or their peace of mind. While many people fear losing, they may tolerate disrespect, overlook dishonesty, excuse broken promises, or remain in one-sided friendships because they believe having people around them is better than standing alone. At first, these compromises seem small. A disrespectful joke is ignored, a broken promise is forgiven, dishonesty is explained away. But small compromises can become patterns. People with strong standards recognize this before it goes too far. That is why they are willing to walk away. They do not necessarily leave relationships because of anger or pride. They understand that constantly being surrounded by drama, manipulation, negativity, or dishonesty can slowly change their own character. So instead of asking, "How can I keep this friendship alive?" they ask a more important question. Is this relationship helping me become a better person, or is it slowly pulling me away from who I want to be? That question can completely change someone's social life. Robert Greene's observations about human nature often emphasize that people naturally test boundaries, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. They discover what behavior another person will tolerate. People with strong standards refuse to teach others that lesson. They establish boundaries. They recognize that saying no is sometimes necessary, and they understand that protecting their standards may reduce the number of people around them, but it can dramatically increase the quality of the people who remain. This can make them appear difficult or overly selective. Some people may say they expect too much. Others may call them cold or distant, but there is a major difference between rejecting people because you believe you are superior and protecting yourself because you understand your value. They are not searching for perfect people. They know perfection does not exist. They are simply looking for honesty, respect, loyalty, and mutual effort. These qualities are not unreasonable demands in a meaningful relationship. They also understand something many people overlook. Relationships influence who you become. Spend enough time around people who constantly complain, and negativity can begin to feel normal. Spend enough time around dishonest people, and integrity can slowly become less important. Spend enough time around people who gossip, and eventually you may wonder what they say about you when you are not present. Every relationship leaves an influence. That is why these individuals are careful about who enters their inner circle. They would rather have fewer friends than allow unhealthy relationships to shape their mindset. Social media has made this lesson even more important. A large social circle can create the appearance of success. Hundreds of followers, constant invitations, endless conversations, and public attention can make someone look socially successful. But popularity does not guarantee loyalty. A person can be surrounded by people and still have nobody they genuinely trust. People with strong personal standards understand this illusion. They are not interested in maintaining relationships. They care about whether someone respects them when nobody else is watching. They care about whether effort is mutual. They care about whether honesty survives conflict. And they care about whether a relationship gives them peace rather than constantly taking it away. This is why they can walk away from relationships that no longer align with their values. They understand that maintaining a connection at any cost is not always a sign of loyalty. Sometimes loyalty to yourself requires letting someone go. There may be moments when this becomes difficult. They may look at other people with large social circles and wonder whether they are expecting too much. But eventually, experience often confirms their choices. They watch others become trapped in friendships filled with jealousy, betrayal, competition, gossip, and emotional manipulation. Meanwhile, their smaller circle remains peaceful and genuine, and they realize something important. Quality matters more than quantity. Having fewer people around you is not necessarily a problem if the people who remain respect your values and contribute something meaningful to your life. The truth is that people who don't have many friends are often not lacking opportunities to build relationships. They are simply unwilling to accept relationships that they understand that genuine friendship should bring mutual respect, encouragement, honesty, and growth, not constant stress and confusion. Protecting your standards may leave you with fewer people, but sometimes fewer people means less noise, less drama, less pretending, and more peace. Their standards are not about proving that they are better than everyone else. They are about refusing to become worse simply to keep someone else in their life. And that is one of the strongest forms of self-respect a person can develop, because eventually, they learn that being alone for a while is far less painful than being surrounded by people who slowly convince you to abandon yourself. And once they understand this, another powerful trait begins to emerge. They become emotionally independent. They no longer need constant attention, reassurance, or approval from others to feel valuable. They learn to stand on their own emotionally, and that independence becomes one of the strongest sources of their confidence. Once you understand that people who don't have friends value solitude, trust carefully, and refuse to settle for fake relationships, another powerful personality trait becomes clear: emotional independence. They learn to rely on themselves instead of constantly seeking attention, reassurance, or approval from the people around them. Most people naturally seek validation. A compliment can make them feel confident, while criticism can immediately make them question themselves. An invitation can make them feel important, while being excluded can make them feel rejected. But people who spend significant time alone often develop a different foundation. They begin asking themselves a more important question: am I living according to my own values? Instead of measuring their worth through other people's reactions, they measure it through their own actions. They ask whether they are improving, whether they are moving toward the person they want to become. This creates a quieter and more stable form of confidence. Robert Greene often emphasizes the importance of self-mastery. A person who constantly depends on external approval gives other people enormous power over their emotions. But someone who becomes comfortable standing alone gradually takes that power back. They realize that acceptance gained by pretending to be someone else is not worth having. They would rather disappoint the crowd than betray their own principles. This emotional independence also changes how they make difficult decisions. They worry about what friends, relatives, co-workers, or strangers will think. As a result, they may delay important decisions or choose a path simply because it is socially accepted. Emotionally independent people become more comfortable making decisions without universal approval. They understand that every meaningful path eventually requires some degree of independence. This trait also protects them from manipulation. Unhealthy relationships often survive because one person is terrified. Once you understand that people who don't have friends often become emotionally independent, another personality trait naturally begins to stand out. They speak less, observe more, and reveal very little about themselves. This is one of those traits that society frequently misunderstands. A quiet person is often labeled shy. A reserved person may be called arrogant. Someone who does not participate in every conversation may be considered antisocial. And someone who keeps their personal life private may be accused of having something to hide. People who have few friends often develop this ability because they are comfortable sitting back and watching what happens around them. They do not always feel the need to become the center of attention. They are not desperate to prove how intelligent they are, how successful they are, or how interesting their lives are. Instead, they listen, and when they listen carefully, they begin noticing things that other people miss. Human beings reveal themselves constantly. They reveal themselves through the words they choose. They reveal themselves through how they behave when they are angry. They reveal themselves through the people they blame. They reveal themselves through the promises they keep and the promises they repeatedly break. Most people are too busy preparing their own response to notice these details, but the person who listens carefully has an advantage. They have time to observe. Robert Greene's ideas about human nature often emphasize the importance of watching behavior instead of being hypnotized by appearances. People naturally want others to see the best version of them. They can control their words. They can carefully manage their image. They can appear confident, generous, intelligent, or friendly, but that is why observant people do not necessarily make conclusions from one conversation. They wait. They watch what happens next. Someone may tell you they are loyal. The observer watches whether they actually remain loyal when circumstances become difficult. Someone may say they respect everyone. The observer watches how they treat people beneath them. Someone may claim they never gossip. The observer notices whether they constantly discuss the private lives of other people. Someone may describe themselves as honest. The observer watches what they are collecting information, and this habit can protect them from making emotional decisions too quickly. Many relationships begin with excitement. Two people meet. They have a great conversation. They laugh. They discover similar interests. One person gives the other attention, and suddenly, emotions begin moving faster than reality. A person may start imagining that they have found a best friend before they have actually learned anything important about the other person's character. This is where observant people behave differently. They can enjoy a conversation without immediately creating an emotional attachment. They can appreciate someone's kindness without assuming that person is automatically trustworthy. They can be interested in someone without revealing everything about themselves. They understand that first impressions are only introductions. They are not evidence of long-term character. Time is evidence. Consistency is evidence. Behavior under pressure is evidence. This patience can prevent enormous disappointment, because once someone becomes emotionally attached, it becomes much harder to see reality clearly. They begin defending the person they want someone to be instead of accepting the person they actually are. Warning signs become easier to ignore. Excuses become easier to create. The mind begins protecting the relationship rather than examining it. But people who have learned to observe before attaching emotionally have a natural advantage. They give reality time to reveal itself. They are comfortable with silence. And silence is extremely useful when you are trying to understand another person. When you constantly fill every silence with your own words, you may accidentally prevent someone else from revealing themselves. But when you pause, people often continue talking. And when people talk freely, they reveal priorities, insecurities, ambitions, frustrations, beliefs, and habits. Sometimes they reveal these things without even realizing it. One person spends most of the time explaining themselves. The other listens. The first person may believe they are controlling the conversation, but the listener may actually be learning far more. They are discovering what the other person cares about, what makes them angry, what makes them jealous, what they admire, what they fear, what they believe about other people, what they say when they think nobody will challenge them. All of that information matters. This does not mean that quiet people are secretly manipulating everyone around them. That would be an unfair assumption. Being observant does not automatically make someone calculating. Often, it simply means they have developed patience. They understand that not every situation requires an immediate reaction, and this ability can create remarkable emotional control. Think about how often unnecessary conflict begins because someone reacts before thinking. Someone says something offensive, you immediately respond. Someone misunderstands you, you become defensive. Someone criticizes you, you attack back. Someone ignores you, you assume they are disrespecting you. Emotion takes control and the situation becomes larger than it needed to be. But the person who has learned to pause has another option. They can wait. They can ask. That pause is powerful. Silence gives emotion time to settle, and once emotion becomes calmer, judgment becomes clearer. This is one reason observant people may appear unusually calm during conflict. They are not necessarily feeling nothing. They may simply refuse to react immediately. They understand that once words leave your mouth, you cannot completely take them back. Anger can produce sentences that permanently damage relationships. Excitement can create promises that cannot be kept. Fear can make someone reveal information. You speak because you have something worth saying, rather than because silence makes you uncomfortable. You reveal information because someone has earned it, rather than because you feel pressured to explain yourself. You share personal experiences because you trust the person listening, rather than because you need immediate emotional validation. That creates privacy, and privacy is another characteristic frequently misunderstood. Some people believe that if you do not share everything, you must be hiding something. But privacy is not secrecy. Privacy is understanding that not every part of your life belongs to the public. Not every success needs to be displayed. Not every relationship needs to be explained. Not every opinion needs to be published. People who value privacy understand that attention can become a form of pressure. Once everyone knows what you are planning, you may start feeling obligated to prove that plan will succeed. Once everyone knows about your problems, you may feel pressure to explain every decision. Once everyone knows about your relationship, other people's opinions can begin influencing something that should belong primarily to the people involved, so they protect certain parts of their lives. This is particularly important when someone is working toward a difficult goal. They may prefer to work quietly. Instead of announcing every ambition, they build. Instead of constantly telling people what they are going to do, they focus on actually doing it. They understand that results speak more clearly than announcements, and this mindset can be extremely powerful. There is also another reason reserved people may reveal very little about themselves: experience. Some people were once extremely open. They told friends everything. They shared personal problems. They discussed their ambitions. Then they discovered that not everyone handles vulnerability with respect. Private information can become gossip. Weaknesses can become weapons during arguments. Personal struggles can become entertainment for people who never genuinely cared. And when this happens repeatedly, a person learns. They do not necessarily become dishonest. They simply become selective. They begin asking themselves, has this person earned the right to know this? That is a much healthier question than automatically telling everyone everything. Trust should determine access, not pressure, not curiosity, not social expectations. And this selective openness can make someone appear mysterious. People naturally become curious about individuals who do not reveal everything. If someone tells you their entire life story within the first conversation, there is very little left to discover. But someone who gradually reveals themselves creates a different experience. You learn about them over time. You discover their values through their actions. You understand their personality through repeated interactions. And that can lead to deeper relationships, because genuine intimacy is not created by dumping information onto another person. It is created by gradually building trust. Later, you see them insulting a waiter because their food arrived late. That contradiction tells you something. Someone says they hate gossip. Then they spend an hour telling you private stories about their closest friend. Another contradiction. Someone says they support your success. Then every time you achieve something, they make jokes designed to minimize it. Another contradiction. Observant people notice these moments. They may not confront the person immediately. They may not confront the person immediately. They may not confront the person immediately. Sometimes, the smartest response is simply changing how much access that person has to your life. That is emotional discipline. It allows you to protect yourself without unnecessary drama. And this is another reason people with few friends can sometimes appear distant. They may have already noticed things that other people have not. They may understand that a relationship is unhealthy before everyone else does. They may see the pattern behind someone's behavior, and instead of arguing, they quietly step back. From the outside, it looks sudden. To them, it may have been building for months. They have been watching, they have been listening, they have been noticing, and eventually they made it. This is why you should be careful about judging a quiet person simply because they do not explain themselves. You may not know what they have observed. You may not know what experiences taught them to become reserved. You may not know how many times they trusted someone too quickly and regretted it. You may not know what they have learned from years of watching people. Their silence may have a history, and sometimes that history is the reason they no longer feel the need to explain every decision. Of course, there is a danger here. Observation can become overthinking. Privacy can become isolation. Silence can become avoidance. A person who becomes too suspicious of everyone may eventually push away good people. Someone who refuses to reveal anything may make genuine connection almost impossible. Someone who constantly analyzes other people's behavior may forget to participate in life. So the goal is not to become permanently silent or suspicious. The goal is balance. Listen more than you speak, but still communicate. Protect your privacy, but allow trustworthy people to know you. Observe patterns, but do not assume every mistake is evidence of bad character. Take time to trust, but do not make trust impossible. That distinction is essential. The healthiest form of observation is not paranoia, it is awareness. You are not looking for reasons to dislike it. And that is one of the greatest strengths of people who have learned to speak less and observe more. They become difficult to deceive through superficial charm. They are less impressed by appearances. They do not automatically believe confident people. They do not automatically distrust quiet people. They watch behavior, and behavior eventually tells the truth. Another fascinating part of this personality trait is that quiet people often hear things that others overlook. When you are not constantly preparing your next sentence, you can actually listen. You notice what topics make them uncomfortable. You notice what they repeatedly complain about. You notice who they admire. You notice who they disrespect. You notice how they talk about people who are absent. And all of these details create a deeper understanding of personality. Human beings are constantly communicating, even when they are not directly saying what they mean. Body language, tone, timing, silence, facial expressions, reactions, patterns. An observant person does not need to know every psychological theory to notice these things. They simply pay attention, and over time their judgment becomes sharper. This can also make them more difficult to manipulate. Manipulation often depends on getting someone to react quickly. Manipulation often depends on getting someone to react quickly. Manipulation often depends on getting someone to react quickly. Manipulation often depends on getting someone to react quickly. If someone can make you angry, they can influence your decisions. If someone can make you afraid, they can control your behavior. If someone can make you desperate for approval, they can push your boundaries. But someone who pauses before reacting becomes harder to control. They ask, what exactly is happening here? Why is this person saying this? What do they want? Does their behavior match their words? Am I reacting to facts or emotions? Those questions create distance between stimulus and response. And within that distance is freedom. You do not have to respond to everything. You do not have to explain, and you do not have to prove yourself every time someone misunderstands you. Sometimes silence is the most controlled response available. Not because you are afraid to speak, because you have decided that speaking would add nothing. This is particularly powerful when dealing with people who constantly seek conflict. Arguing with someone who wants an argument often gives them exactly what they wanted, but refusing to participate can remove the reward. The observant person understands this. They know that not every battle deserves their energy. They know that some people are not looking for understanding. They are looking for reaction. This is why solitude, emotional independence, and observation often develop together. A person who is comfortable alone does not need to constantly perform. A person who does not desperately seek approval can listen without worrying about how they appear. A person who has strong standards can quietly step away from unhealthy relationships. And a person who observes carefully can recognize unhealthy relationships earlier. These traits reinforce each other. Eventually, the person develops a calm and selective way of moving through the world. They do not need to know every decision. They simply want to understand what is happening around them and choose where their attention belongs. That is a form of personal power. Attention is one of your most valuable resources. Whatever you constantly focus on becomes part of your mental environment. If you spend your attention on gossip, you become immersed in gossip. If you spend it on conflict, conflict occupies your mind. If you spend it trying to impress people, your life becomes centered around their reactions. But if you protect your attention, you can direct it towards something meaningful, your goals, your skills, your health, your work, your relationships, your personal growth. This is another reason people who speak less may have more time for themselves. Your personal growth. They are not constantly participating in every social distraction. They can step back, they can think, they can work, they can improve. And sometimes the most important progress in life happens when nobody is watching. You develop discipline when there is no audience. You build character when there is no applause. You learn when nobody is impressed. You continue when nobody is encouraging you. That is where genuine strength develops. So if you meet someone who speaks very little, do not automatically assume they are hiding something. They may simply have learned that words have value. If someone keeps their personal life private, if someone observes before trusting, do not immediately assume they are cold. They may have learned that time reveals character. And if someone does not participate in every social situation, do not assume they are missing something. They may have become comfortable enough with themselves that they no longer need constant stimulation. The truth is that people who don't have friends often develop a unique relationship with silence. They learn to listen. They learn to watch. They learn to think before reacting. They learn that not every thought needs to become a statement. They learn that understanding people is often more valuable than constantly trying to be understood. Their silence is not empty. It contains observation. Their privacy is not necessarily secrecy. It contains boundaries. Their restraint is not weakness. It contains self-control. And their small social circle is not automatically evidence of failure. Sometimes it is the result of careful selection. They would rather know a few people deeply than know hundreds superficially. They would rather have one trustworthy friend than dozens of people who disappear when circumstances become difficult. They would rather be, and perhaps the greatest lesson is this: you do not need to speak constantly to have something valuable to say. You do not need to reveal everything to prove that you are genuine. You do not need to be popular to be valuable, and you do not need to chase attention to earn respect. Sometimes the person sitting quietly in the corner is learning more than everyone else in the room. They are watching, they are listening, they are thinking, and while everyone else is trying to be noticed, they are trying to understand. That is why people who speak less and observe more can develop such a deep understanding of human behavior. And once you understand this, the final personality trait becomes even more powerful. When a person stops chasing attention, approval, and popularity, they eventually begin directing that energy towards something much bigger: purpose. Instead of asking how many people know them, they begin asking what they are building. Instead of chasing popularity, they chase progress. Instead of trying to impress everyone, they focus on becoming valuable. And that final shift can transform solitude from something society misunderstands into the foundation of a meaningful life. The goal was to become so grounded in who you are that you no longer need a crowd to tell you who you should become. As you have seen throughout this journey, people who don't have friends often share personality traits that society completely misunderstands. They value solitude over social approval. They trust people slowly. They refuse to settle for fake relationships. They become emotionally independent. They speak less and observe more. And all of these traits eventually lead to one final personality trait that brings everything together. And this shift changes everything. Most people spend a significant part of their lives trying to fit in. They worry about whether people like them. They worry about whether they are invited. They worry about whether people agree with their opinions. They worry about whether anyone notices them. They worry about what others think of their appearance, career, lifestyle, relationships, and decisions. Without realizing it, they can slowly begin making choices based on approval rather than purpose. They may choose a career because it impresses other people. They may remain in friendships that no longer help them grow because they are afraid of being alone. They may hide their real personality because they are afraid of rejection. They may avoid taking risks because failure would make them look weak. And eventually, their life becomes less about what they genuinely want and more about maintaining an image. People who have learned to live with solitude often begin escaping this cycle. They discover that popularity is temporary, purpose is not. Popularity depends on other people's opinions, purpose depends on your own commitment. Popularity can disappear when trends change. Purpose can continue even when nobody is watching. This is why people who don't have many friends may eventually become deeply focused on their own development. They stop asking, how can I make everyone like me? They start asking, what can I build? What can I learn? What kind of person can I become? What is worth dedicating my life to? Those questions create direction. Robert Greene's ideas about influence and human nature often point toward a similar principle. Real respect is rarely created by desperately asking for attention. It develops when someone becomes disciplined, capable, valuable, and consistent. The most influential people throughout history did not spend every moment trying to convince everyone to admire them. They developed something, they mastered something. They created something, they pursued an idea, they dedicated themselves to a purpose, and eventually recognition followed their work. People who are comfortable being alone can discover this lesson earlier, because they have already learned something extremely important. They can continue without an audience. They can work without applause. They can improve without being congratulated. They can pursue a goal without constantly announcing it. This changes the way they spend their time. While others may spend hours maintaining appearances, these individuals may spend those hours building themselves. They read, they study, they develop valuable skills, they develop ideas, they create, they plan. And slowly, the person they are becoming becomes more important than the attention they receive. This is where purpose becomes powerful. Purpose gives solitude direction. Without purpose, being alone can become empty. With purpose, solitude can become productive. A person who wakes up every morning with something meaningful to pursue does not spend every hour wondering who is thinking about them. Their attention is directed towards something larger. They have work to do, skills to develop, problems to solve, goals to achieve, lessons to learn. The second is much more stable, because approval can disappear, but commitment can remain. Imagine building your confidence entirely around other people's reactions. One day people praise you. You feel powerful. The next day they criticize you. You feel worthless. One day everyone supports your decision. The next day they question it. You begin doubting yourself. This creates emotional instability. But when confidence comes from purpose, your foundation becomes different. You know why you are working. You know what your identity. Rejection may sting, but it does not determine your worth. You can learn from it and continue. This is why becoming valuable is often more important than becoming popular. Popularity depends on perception. Value depends on substance. A popular person may be forgotten when public attention moves somewhere else. But someone who develops real skills, creates meaningful work, helps others, or contributes something important can remain valuable long after attention disappears. People who have few friends they learn to do things because they matter, not because someone is watching. This is one of the strongest forms of discipline. Anyone can work when people are cheering. Real discipline appears when nobody cares. Anyone can stay motivated when success is visible. Real commitment appears when progress is slow. Anyone can talk about their goals when people are listening. Real determination appears when you continue quietly after everyone else has forgotten what you said. Solitude can create the environment where this kind of discipline develops. It removes some of the distractions. It gives you time to think. It gives you room to work. And comparison is one of the greatest enemies of purpose. Social media makes comparison almost unavoidable. You see someone's success, someone else's vacation, someone else's relationship, someone else's business, someone else's body, someone else's lifestyle, and suddenly your own progress feels smaller. But people who develop strong purpose learn to step away from that comparison. They understand that someone else's achievement does not reduce their own potential. Their only meaningful comparison is with who they were yesterday. Are they more disciplined? Are they wiser? Are they healthier? Are they more skilled? Not applause, not attention, progress. This is also why purpose helps protect a person from unnecessary social distractions. When you know what matters to you, it becomes easier to say no. No to pointless arguments. No to constant gossip. No to relationships built entirely on drama. No to invitations that consistently pull you away from your priorities. No to spending every evening trying to prove that you have a social life. No to wasting hours simply because you are afraid of missing something. You begin understanding that time is limited. Every hour has an opportunity cost. If you spend it chasing approval, you cannot spend that same hour building your future. This does not mean you should reject every social experience. That would be another extreme. Healthy relationships matter. Friendship matters. Community matters. Human beings need connection. But purpose gives you the ability to choose connection intentionally rather than desperately. You do not attend every gathering because you are afraid of being forgotten. You do not maintain every friendship because you are afraid of being alone. You do not say yes to everything because you want everyone to like you. You ask whether the situation deserves your time. That is disciplined focus. And strangely enough, this often creates the exact opposite result of what people expect. The less you chase popularity, the more genuine respect you may receive. People notice someone who does not constantly seek attention. They notice someone who has direction. They notice someone who does not need to announce every achievement. They notice consistency. They notice discipline. They notice calmness. They notice someone who seems comfortable with themselves. Why? Because confidence does not need to constantly introduce itself. A person who genuinely knows their direction does not have to convince everyone else that they have one. Their actions eventually communicate it. This is why purpose can naturally create respect. Not because the person is trying to look powerful, but because they have become dependable. They do what they say. They finish what they start. They remain consistent. And people naturally respect that kind of character. Another powerful benefit of purpose is that it can protect a person from loneliness. This does not mean purpose eliminates the human need for connection. It does not. Even someone with a powerful mission can experience loneliness. But purpose gives solitude meaning. There is a huge difference between sitting alone wondering why nobody wants you and sitting alone working towards something you deeply believe in. The physical situation may look identical, but psychologically it is completely different. One feels like abandonment, the other feels like preparation. That distinction can change an entire life. When someone has something meaningful to pursue, they stop measuring every moment by social activity. They can spend a quiet evening reading. They can spend a weekend working. They can spend months developing a skill. They can travel alone. They can build something privately. And instead of constantly asking, "Why am I alone?" they begin asking, "What can I create with this time?" That question transforms solitude into opportunity. And this is where all the previous traits come together. Solitude taught them to walk away from relationships that damage their self-respect. Emotional independence taught them not to depend on approval. Observation taught them to understand people without constantly needing to impress them. And purpose gives all of those traits direction. It takes solitude and turns it into focus. It takes independence and turns it into discipline. It takes observation and turns it into wisdom. It takes strong standards and turns them into a clear life philosophy. The person is no longer simply avoiding people. They are choosing where their energy belongs. And that is a major difference. Some people spend their entire lives trying to be accepted by everyone. They change their personality depending on the room. They hide their opinions. They tolerate disrespect. They chase relationships. They fear rejection. They measure their worth through attention. But eventually they may realize that no amount of approval can compensate for a life that does not belong to them. Purpose offers another path. It says, build yourself, learn, create, improve, serve something meaningful, become someone you respect, then allow relationships to develop around that foundation. This does not guarantee that you will become famous. It does not guarantee financial success. It does not guarantee that everyone will admire you. Purpose is not about guaranteeing an outcome. It is about giving your life direction, and direction matters. A person with direction can hear criticism without losing their path. A person without purpose may chase every opportunity. A person with purpose can say no. A person without internal standards may accept whatever relationship appears. A person with purpose knows what kind of people fit into their life. That clarity is powerful. It also creates patience. Someone who understands purpose does not need everything immediately. They can wait. They can build slowly. They can accept that meaningful results often require years. This is another reason they may appear different from the people around them. While everyone else is looking for immediate validation, they are willing to work for long-term results. And while everyone else wants to be seen, they are willing to remain invisible until the work is ready. While everyone else is chasing the next distraction, they continue moving toward the same goal. That consistency eventually compounds. A skill becomes expertise. A habit becomes discipline. A small project becomes something meaningful. A period of solitude becomes personal transformation. And the person who once looked isolated may eventually become someone others admire. But the irony is that admiration was never the original goal. You should not build yourself simply so other people will finally approve of you. That would still make your life dependent on approval. Build yourself because you respect the person you could become. Learn because you want to understand. Work because you want to create. Improve because you want to grow. Maintain standards because you value your character. Choose relationships because they are meaningful, not because they protect you from loneliness. And pursue purpose because your life deserves direction. Then, if respect comes, it becomes a side effect rather than the objective. If people admire you, if your social circle is small, do not automatically assume your life is incomplete. Look at the quality of your life. Look at your character. Look at your habits. Look at your relationships. Look at your purpose. Those things matter far more than a number. The truth is that people who don't have friends are often misunderstood because society focuses on numbers instead of character. We see the size of someone's social circle and immediately create assumptions, but numbers cannot tell us what happens inside a person's mind. They cannot tell us whether someone is surrounded by genuine people or superficial ones. They cannot tell us whether someone has chosen solitude or simply experienced it. And they certainly cannot tell us someone's worth. Some people need large communities to feel fulfilled. Others prefer a small circle. Some thrive in constant social environments. Others need significant periods of solitude. There is no single formula for a meaningful life, but there is one principle that remains powerful. Do not sacrifice yourself simply to avoid being alone. If a relationship requires you to abandon your values, constantly tolerate disrespect, or become someone you are not, walking away may be healthier than staying. If a social group requires you to pretend, you may eventually realize that being excluded is less painful than losing your identity. If popularity demands that you betray your principles, popularity is too expensive. And if solitude gives you the opportunity to become stronger, wiser, calmer, and more authentic, then use it. Use the quiet, use the time, use the freedom. Build, learn, reflect, and enter your life. You will not need them to complete you. You will be meeting them as a complete person. That changes the nature of relationships. You are no longer saying, "Please stay because I cannot handle being alone." You are saying, "That is a healthier foundation." The first comes from fear. The second comes from choice. And choice is where real freedom begins. So perhaps the next time you meet someone who has very few friends, you should pause before judging them. Do not immediately assume they are lonely. Do not assume they are rejected. Do not assume they are socially incapable. They may be going through a difficult period, and they may genuinely want more connection. Or they may simply have learned to value something most people underestimate: their own peace. They may have discovered that solitude can teach them things a crowd never could. They may trust slowly because experience taught them to watch actions. They may have strong standards because they refuse to trade self-respect for companionship. They may be emotionally independent because they learned that their worth cannot depend on someone else's attention. They may speak less because they understand the power of observation. And they may be focused on purpose because they have realized that popularity is temporary, while character and meaningful work can last. These traits do not make someone better than everyone else, but they can make someone different from what society expects. And that difference is often misunderstood. The ultimate lesson is not that you should stop making friends. It is not that everyone should, and it is not that having many friends is somehow bad. The lesson is much simpler. Do not measure the quality of a life by the number of people standing around it. Measure it by the quality of the person living it. Measure it by integrity. Measure it by growth. Measure it by purpose. Measure it by the ability to remain yourself when nobody is watching. Because at the end of the day, the most important relationship you will ever build is the relationship you have with yourself. If you cannot respect yourself, popularity will never fix that. If you do not know who you are, a crowd will not give you an identity. If you have no purpose, attention will not give your life meaning. And if you are terrified of being alone, you may spend your entire life accepting people who were never good for you. But when you become comfortable standing alone, something changes. You stop begging for acceptance. You stop chasing people who do not value you. You stop confusing attention with friendship. You stop confusing popularity with respect. You stop confusing loneliness with failure. And you begin building, quietly, patiently, deliberately. You become more disciplined, more self-aware, more selective, more emotionally stable. You no longer need to chase the right people. You simply become the kind of person who naturally recognizes them when they arrive. thrive. You know what loyalty looks like. You know what respect feels like. You know what healthy connection requires. And you know what you will never sacrifice again. That is the real transformation. The goal was never to become someone who needs nobody. The goal was to become someone who does not abandon themselves simply because they are afraid of being alone. Because the wrong people can make you feel lonely even when they are standing beside you. The right people can make solitude feel peaceful even when they are. It is the one who can stand alone, remain authentic, continue growing, and still have enough wisdom to welcome the right people when they appear. So if you are currently in a season of solitude, do not automatically assume that something is wrong with you. Use this time. Learn from it. Understand yourself. Strengthen your character. Build your skills. Protect your peace. Develop your purpose. And become someone you are proud to be. Because eventually you may realize that the years you thought were simply lonely were actually the years that prepared you. The years when you walked alone may have been the years when you finally learned where you were going. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. You do not need to be accepted by the wrong people. You need to become the right person for the life you are trying to build. Popularity may give you attention. Solitude may give you clarity. Approval may make you feel accepted. Purpose can give you direction. A crowd may make you feel visible. Character can make you valuable. And when you finally understand the difference, you stop chasing people and start building a life. That is when everything changes. And when the right people eventually find their way into your life, they will not be entering an empty space. They will be entering a life that already has meaning. A life built on self-respect. A life built on discipline. A life built on authenticity. A life built on purpose. And that is far more powerful than popularity ever could be.